Hello, this is Cheryl. Thank you so much for joining me today. So in my last video, I showed making a beach charcuterie board, and I mentioned that I always have a side project for the excess resin, and this is the side project for that. I'm just going to make some beach resin coasters with the excess resin. There's no point in it going, then it curing in the cups. The excess, might as well use it. Sometimes I'll do little experiments. This time I decided to do a couple coasters to go with the charcuterie board. So the first color I had there was a dark blue. Now I'm putting some lighter blue, and I'm going to mix them a little bit with my fingers just to smooth it out, make sure that it's getting good coverage. I also like to take that time to shape the edges of the waves. It's a lot easier to do it this way than when you're pouring. Sometimes it doesn't like to pour the way you want it to. So I just like to make sure it has some good coverage. I also like to make sure that it is going over the edges evenly, because if it misses some areas going off the edges, then it's going to be kind of a lumpy outer area. It's just not going to look quite as finished. So once I have those mixed and I have the waves how I like them, I'm going to put a thin line of clear resin with no color in it along the whole thing. And then I'm going to do a layer of, or a clear line, or sorry, a line of white, and put that right on the outside of my clear layer. By having that clear layer between the blue and the white, it just helps the waves go a little bit better. I also like to put some streaks of that white in the blue just to give it a little bit of different color. It just looks a lot nicer. So I'm using my heat tool and I am just popping all of the bubbles. Then I'm going to raise the speed to it and blow out those waves over the blue. Once I'm happy with how those look, I will let it sit and cure. Typically for the first half an hour, 45 minutes or so, I will watch it. And if there's any bubbles that raise to the surface, I'll take my heat gun back out and I will pop them. And then I like to wait about 24 hours between layers. You can do it less, you could do it 12 hours. I wait a little bit longer simply for the noise level and the people around my house. I like to do it when it's quiet, and I also like to do it when it's nice and light outside. I don't have a whole lot of great lighting where I do this, so by having natural light, it's helpful. So this is after 24 hours. This is my second layer. You just saw me do the dark blue and the light blue layer, and now I'm smoothing them out and shaping my waves. And then once again, after that is done and I'm happy with that, I will be doing my clear line and then my white line, and I will blow the waves out. Now, a great way to test to see if you're ready for your next layer, if you want to do it less than a day apart, is on a part that you are going to cover with your next layer, take a toothpick or just something that you don't mind if it gets ruined with resin if it's not quite ready yet, and just press. If you can press and it just leaves an indent, then you're ready for your next layer. If you press into there and you raise some out and it's sticky and gooey, then it's not quite ready yet. If you pour the next layer too soon, it's just going to kind of meld into your first layer or the layer you're pouring on. So you need to make sure that it is cured enough so that that second layer or third layer, whatever layer, is raised higher. So now this is my third layer here. I'm once again doing the same process. Every single layer is pretty much the same process. This one I did do a dark blue and a light blue, I believe. We'll see in just a second. Yeah, there we go. A light layer too. My next layer I only did just the dark color. So I just sped it up because the process is exactly the same for every layer. So once again, I'm just smoothing out everything, making sure it's going down the sides evenly and making sure that I like the shape of my waves. Now a thin layer of clear, and then a thin line of white, and then obviously remove the bubbles and blow the white over the blue to blow out the waves and get that lacing. Now, every single time I pop the bubbles in my resin before I blow over the lacing, what that also does is it heats up the resin. It makes it a little bit more fluid. Here is my 4th layer. Typically I leave the waves at 3 layers. I was doing more on my charcuterie board, so I just had the extra resin and figured might as well add it to the coasters. But certainly something this small doesn't need this many waves. So I just did the blue, dark blue. I didn't have the 2 tones of blue for this one. A clear layer of, or a clear line, and now a white line, and blowing it over. And then after it has been blown over, once again, every single layer, I look for the first 30 to 45 minutes and just check. Make sure there's no bubbles, and if there is, I use my heat tool to pop them. Now this last one here, I'm just putting a clear layer over the whole thing, trying to even the whole thing out. When I started these coasters, I actually just grabbed them because I realized I had extra resin and I hadn't thought ahead of time to prep them. So I typically will put a clear layer over the whole thing before I do resin coasters, or a colored layer for the sand. And I didn't do that for this one, so I'm just putting a clear layer over top. If you happen to get any lint or anything in that floats in your resin before it's cured, I just use a toothpick. Words are hard today apparently, and just pick it out. If it happens after it's cured too much, you need to add another layer. So these are all the drips that I have on the bottom of my coasters. Now these particular coasters come with cork bottoms, so it is going to cover anything. I'm just going to take my retractable razor scraper and my heat tool. I use my heat tool to warm up the resin, and then I carefully use my razor to cut off the excess drips. I try to make it as smooth and as nice as possible, just so I have a smooth surface to work on, and put the cork backing on. If it's bumpy, you're going to see it, so you want to make sure that you've got a nice surface for that to go on. But it doesn't need to be pristine clear because it's going to be covered anyways. So you want to be very, very careful with the razor because it is sharp. Try not to do it towards yourself. Try to do it away from yourself, and be very gentle. If you have to force the resin drips up, they're not heated up enough. Just heat it up a little bit more. Typically it works quite easily and quite smoothly unless the resin is cold. So you don't want to force it. Just take your time, work away from yourself. And I typically will heat up about an inch or 2 at a time. I don't do the whole thing because by the time I got to 1 or 2 far, the resin would have cooled anyways. So just a little bit at a time. I'm not showing this entire process. I'm just showing the beginning because it's fairly repetitive. But it is one of my favorite things to do when working with resin. I just find it very satisfying to take these drips off the bottom. Typically, if I'd planned a project ahead of time, I'd use some liquid latex or would have taped the bottom off just to make this a little bit easier. But because it's being covered up, it's not really a big deal. It just makes it takes a little bit longer doing it this way without any prep. Once this is completely cleared off, the cork backings that come with these have an adhesive on them, but I do take an extra glue and glue them on just because I'm not quite sure how good the adhesive is that comes with them. So I want to make sure that those backings are not going to come off. So these are the cork backings that come with them. They're exactly the same size as the wood coasters. I'm using E6000 glue. This is a really, really good glue for this. You can also use this same glue for doing jewelry and stuff like that. So I know it sticks really, really well. I've used it for years. And I'm just putting a little line around the edges, and then I'm just going to put kind of little blobs throughout the back of the coaster. I just want to make sure that I have a decent amount of that glue there to glue them down. And then take the backing off of the cork and just fit it right onto the back of the coaster. Super, super easy, but it gives it a really nice look at the back. And there you go. Could never tell that those resin drips are under there. But you can see from that back there that I'm holding that you can get it quite clean. It just takes a little bit of patience. This one here, I didn't put a line around the edges. I just put a bunch of different blobs, but it still works just the same. And you'll want to make sure to wait before using them. Like, make sure to give time for that glue to completely cure before you go and use these coasters. Otherwise, they'll just slide. The glue kind of is slippery when it's wet. There we have our 2 finished coasters. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you have a fabulous day.